is Antoine Rogers with another episode of Out and Up, where we encourage young athletes to achieve their very best outside of the game. So again, we have an awesome guest, and y'all know how I usually do. I usually allow our guests to fully introduce themselves. However, I'm gonna give you a little bit about our guest today because this subject to me is near and dear to heart, an area that I'm continuously educating myself when it comes to mental health. I believe for our youth to truly achieve their very best outside of the game, this is an area that can no longer be ignored. If you're a fan of sports or mentor in any way, we continuously see our young people in some way or another, just wrestling and tussling with different mental health issues, or, there's even some stigmas I believe people have and some information people don't have that makes it very hard for them to really focus in and address certain issues. So I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction, and I'm going to allow our guest today to give the rest. So first and foremost, we have today before us Dr. Dana Cunningham. Dr. Dana Cunningham was born and raised in Lansing, Michigan, and she now resides in Maryland. Dr. Cunningham obtained a bachelor's in psychology from Spelman College and obtained her master's and PhD in clinical psychology from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. Dr. Cunningham is a licensed psychologist in Maryland and has provided mental health services to culturally diverse children, adolescents, and families in a variety of settings, including community mental health centers, inpatient hospitals, juvenile detention centers, schools, and her private practice. She is passionate about increasing access to mental health care and decreasing mental health stigma in the Black community. Dr. Dana Cunningham, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to join you today and have a conversation about this very, very important topic, mental health. And just to tell you a little bit more about myself, you did a fabulous introduction. Thank you so much. But I am also the Vice President of Community Outreach and Engagement for Black Mental Wellness. So Black Mental Wellness is a corporation that was developed with 4 other clinical psychologists, and we just realized there was just really a great need to increase conversations and increase information about mental health and wellness from a Black perspective. And so as part of Black Mental Wellness, we do a lot. You can find out more about us at www.blackmentalwellness.com. We're also on all social media platforms. But one of the things that we try to do is really reduce the stigma associated with mental health, make it normal to talk about mental health. And you'll see a lot of that on our social media. We also have a national training program where we have undergraduate and graduate students. We pair them up with professionals in the mental health field. We have an ambassador program. We have an annual conference. We do trainings and consultations. So we stay very busy on that end. And then also I am a program director of a school-based mental health program. So I oversee clinicians and community outreach workers who are providing services to students in schools. So I was happy to be here with you today and have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you once again. And I'm going to kind of go a little off track real quick to begin, because as I have guests on, I'm doing my research, reading. And so something I want to kind of go off track a little bit. Dr. Cunningham is also an author, correct?
Yes, I didn't want to go all into my bio, but since you want to bring it up, I did write a children's book. It's called A Day I'll Never Forget. It's a book about a young boy whose father ends up going to jail and is incarcerated, and just really talks about how, certainly some of the issues that come up for him, some of the emotional reactions he has from when he finds out to when he goes to school. Should he talk about it? Should he not talk about it? The experiences he has when he goes to even visit his father. But ultimately, the story is about just the importance of maintaining those connections and, helping young children know they're not alone if they are experiencing that as well.
That's good. That's good. So if someone wants to get a copy of the book, where can they get your book?
Yes, they can find it on Amazon.
Okay. All right. That's awesome. That was important to me in finding that out about her being an author and what the book was about, because those that know me know I worked in detention for 15 years. And a large reason why I walked away from detention was the need that I saw for more programs outside of the facilities. And my biggest thing was just seeing so many young men come into the facility that were unfathered. And so that subject was near and dear to me. So we had to touch on that. I know we're talking about mental health today, but please, you all support Ms. Cunningham. Get a copy of that book. If you know a young person that may be addressing that issue, I believe you need to get a copy of that book. So we're going to get on into the interview. And I think this is something that's starting off so many people confused. And I believe, like I said again, I'm continuously educating myself. But first question, what's the difference between mental health and mental illness?
Okay, great question. Yeah, so mental health, just like physical health, we all have some aspect, some quality of mental health. So mental health, your mental health is going to determine how well you respond to stress, how you cope with disappointments, how you act, think, and behave, essentially. Kind of, we think about our mental health, and the same way that we take care of our physical health, we have to take care of our mental health as well. When we think about mental illness, when we see people that have mental illnesses, they are exhibiting more extreme impairment. So, for instance, we all feel sad occasionally. We get bad news, you have a breakup, maybe are worried about something, those sorts of things, worried about a big test coming up. Those sorts of things are normal and natural reactions. Mental illness, typically we see, for instance, a feeling of sadness, but lasts much longer than we would expect if, for instance, someone broke up with their, significant other. You might be sad for a couple of days, maybe even a week, but you kind of start getting back into your regular flow. For someone who was really significantly depressed, it may take them much longer to really get back into their flow. We would see a lot of changes in their behavior. Mental illness, really, we see an impact either in, for young people, it's impacting their relationships with other people, whether it be family members or friends or peers. Older adults, usually it's going to show up in terms of their work performance, being able to concentrate at work, being able to stay focused, perhaps losing a job because of the significant mental health issues. So really, it's a level of impairment when we think about mental illness. So that level of impairment that really prevents us, it really makes it really, really hard to get through sort of basic functional tasks that we need to get done on a day-to-day basis.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to ask so often, and we're going to mainly zone in and focus on the African-American community, but let's discuss the negative stigma of mental health and why many people don't even address it. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, you said particularly within the Black community, there is a huge stigma related to talking about mental health, acknowledging there's a mental health issue, and seeking help for mental health issues. Oftentimes, we have been raised in our community like, keep your business at home, don't tell everybody else what's going on, right? And so for some people, that then becomes a barrier because they feel like, I was raised to kind of keep stuff to myself. I don't want to go and tell a stranger about something that's going on with me. Sometimes it's this idea that we have to be strong, that we can't show weakness, that keeps us from talking about it or acknowledging that there is an issue or that we're feeling a little bit not quite like our normal selves. Particularly within the Black community, there's also oftentimes a push-pull that some people feel if they're very religious or very spiritual, they may feel like, well, or may even be told, just go to church, just pray. that will take care of everything. And I'm a Christian, but I'm also a psychologist. So, I think you could go to church and go to therapy at the same time. So we just have to really learn, the same way you take care of your spiritual health. I talked earlier about taking care of your physical health. We take care of our mental health by talking to someone and getting the support that we need. But also I think it's important to recognize that there have been, particularly with the Black community, things that have happened that have made it a little bit harder for people to seek services or people to access services, right? So we may not be as trusting of mental health or medical professionals for, maybe we've experienced racism, whether it be, in a healthcare setting, or thinking about things like the Tuskegee experiment or other things where people were not treated fairly, or were discriminated against, or have other issues. And so those things, we also certainly want to acknowledge that it's also important for providers to be competent enough to support and work effectively with the Black community as well.
All right. So what would you say to the young person, or even an adult that may be watching, if they recognize, wow, I need to kind of speak to someone, but they may be dealing with the trust issue, like give them some advice on just trying to find and seek help. Some people may say, hey, in the town or the state I live in, there's no one that I see that looks like me that I can really trust to talk to. Tell them some of the different outlets that may be out there and seeking that help still.
Yeah, so some people, particularly right now with the pandemic, it has been really hard for some people to find providers, even if there are some in their area. So some people have used, there's some youth organizations that have like virtual support groups or like virtual meetup groups. So for instance, NAMI, so National Association of Mental Illness, is one that tends to have in their communities different groups for youth and young people. There's also a lot of apps out there as well that can provide a lot of support and assistance. So one app, particularly for the Black community, is called Liberate, and it has a lot of different meditations. There's an app you all may have seen. I think LeBron James has done a commercial for Calm, but that's another app that has a lot of relaxation strategies and things like that. And I think it's just really important to find at least one person or some community that you can get some support from, someone to talk to. Sometimes we, as we're saying, we're hesitant to say, you know what, I'm not feeling like myself, I'm feeling a little down, I'm not sure what's going on, because we don't know what people's response is going to be. But it's important that we're not dealing with whatever we're dealing with alone, and that we have someone to talk to, even if they're not a professional, right? Sometimes we know in a barbershop or, the beauty shop, there's a lot of conversation that takes place. And I know even a lot of barbers and professionals are even getting training in some basic mental health skills so they can be able to better support their clientele.
Thanks for that. And so there's a lot of young people. I know, again, the goal in the show is to educate. Like, do you for those that sit around say, oh, I'm good, my mental health is good, I don't have any situations going on. Like, give us some numbers. Like, do you have some ratios as far as young people or teens that in our communities that are dealing with mental health issues?
Yeah, so estimates would suggest like between 20 to 25% of teens are dealing with some sort of mental health disorder. So we think about that like 1 in 4, 1 out of 5, right? So that's a pretty significant number. A lot of our teenagers and young people are going through a lot of stuff. They were going through a lot of stuff before the pandemic, but the pandemic certainly escalated a lot of what people were experiencing. A lot of, we think of high school students who didn't have a chance to go to their prom or their graduation, or everything kind of went virtual. We know that for adolescents, spending time with their peers and peer relationships are so important. And many of them, just instantly, all that connection was really cut off for a period of time. And I know a lot of young people were really struggling with that. So we saw a huge increase in depression, lots of increases in anxiety, and just people just really struggling to cope with everything that was going on, not to mention, the heightened attention to a lot of the police brutality that was happening, all that stuff happened at the same time definitely had an impact. But, it really, a lot of our young people are really struggling with stuff. And we have, sometimes as adults, it's very easy to kind of dismiss and say, oh, you're a teenager, you can't be, that's not going to bother you, tough it up or whatever. But we really need to acknowledge and recognize and support our young people who are dealing with a lot right now.
All right. Two areas I want to kind of touch on, and you really just mentioned both of them, in depression and anxiety. Because as I look at sports, the show is mainly for student athletes. However, any of our youth, I believe, that watch this, I think will definitely get information that's needed in our communities today. But depression and anxiety, can you talk, for those that just don't have a full, clear view of what it is and what it looks like, some signs we need to look at from the outside as well as that person that's dealing with? Let's talk about depression and anxiety. I know even from the sports end, I hear the term, a lot of athletes talk about dealing with performance anxiety. And I just recently was watching a video, Kevin Love, a basketball player that used to play with LeBron in Cleveland. And so he came out talking about some anxiety he was dealing with and not understanding what was going on. So can we, for a moment, just talk about depression? I guess we can touch on depression first. Okay. If you can tell us what that looks like and what someone may experience if they're dealing with depression.
Yeah, sure. So one interesting thing about depression that I think is important for people to know, particularly those that are working with young Black men, is that depression does not always show up as a depressed mood. So particularly in our teenagers, depression can look like a depressed mood, but it can also look like a very irritable mood. So sometimes people expect, one who's depressed to be crying all the time, moping around, that may not be the case for someone who's depressed, but usually there will be either a depressed mood or primarily irritable mood. We also tend to see issues show up with regard to sleeping and eating. So people may tend to eat more or less than usual, or sleep more or less than usual, maybe have some difficulty falling asleep at night, may toss and turn a lot during during their sleep time. We also tend to see with depression difficulties with concentration. So, at school, it's just hard to stay focused, hard to get work done. People often complain of feeling really tired and having low energy. So again, a lot of this will oftentimes show up at school, where we see, maybe grades starting to fall, people tending to isolate themselves a little bit more. One of the other features of depression we sometimes see is people having less interest in things that they used to really enjoy. So if I used to really love to play the drums and that was like my thing, I used to do every, weekend, every Friday night, and all of a sudden I'm like, not really into that anymore. And there's no reason, like I didn't lose my drum set, my band members didn't go away. You just kind of see that there's a change in something that somebody really was interested in before. That's usually another telltale sign. And then there's also, some people do have thoughts of suicide associated with depression. Again, anytime anyone mentions anything related to thinking about death or suicide, sometimes we hear those words and people's reaction like, oh, don't talk about that, don't say that, but we actually want to do the opposite. We want to talk to them, we want to encourage them. Well, tell me what you're thinking about. Are you thinking about doing something to hurt yourself? Do you have a plan? Like on a scale from 1 to 10, how intense is that feeling, right? We don't want to just shut them up and act like we don't care, because that is an important indicator that somebody is at risk and really needs some help.
Okay, that's good. That's good. And we can go right into anxiety and what that looks like.
Okay. So there's lots of different types of anxiety, but just kind of general anxiety is usually you have this overwhelming sense of fear or anxiety that is really difficult to control. And it can show up in a lot of different situations. So it could show up in a game. It could show up just just going outside your house. You feel like this overwhelming sense of dread, like maybe something bad is going to happen to you, just this constant worries that you can't get out of your head, no matter how hard you try to get rid of them. A lot of times with anxiety, we also will see some difficulties, maybe with sleeping, maybe some changes in appetite. A lot of youth and adolescents also have what we call psychosomatic experiences associated with anxiety. So some physical signs that also may go along with it. So they may complain of headaches a lot, or getting a lot of stomachs, or sometimes with the younger kids, it may just be, I don't feel like going to school today. I don't feel good. Right. But then you take their temperature, you do a lot of checks, and you don't really see, any major physical indicators that there's anything wrong. But internally, they just kind of feel really overwhelmed or feel uneasy. So the thing with anxiety, which is a little bit different than depression, is we need to see those symptoms for like 6 months. So it's, as I said before, like we all get anxious sometimes. We all, we worry about a big test and worry about a big game. That doesn't mean you have an anxiety disorder. Might mean you want to kind of come up with some stress management skills or things to kind of relax yourself a little bit before a game. So that's a little bit different. I didn't mention with depression, those signs we usually see within like a 2-week consistent period for about 2 weeks before we would say that somebody is exhibiting pretty significant depression.
All right, thank you. In regards to dealing with, I think this is important because again, from having conversations over the years with many young men and working in detention, so many of them would tell stories, and sometimes you would look and even though you saw them on the crime in the facility, you would look at them and to hear some of the things they go through, it would be like, wow, I'm happy this person is still here. The goal is to talk to them and maybe give them some direction and encourage them to do things better when they get out of the facility. But with some of the things they deal with. So I believe the same thing happens. And I know it's happening because we hear the stories on the back end when it comes to young people that may reach out to athletics as a way to kind of numb the feeling of what they're dealing with when it comes to traumas, different childhood traumas, whether they're in a home where they're seeing abuse going on or they've been abused or molested. Just, I guess, gives the information to that young person that may watch and just seeking some assistance if they've been holding in some of those things that they faced throughout their youth so that they're not carrying it into their adulthood. Yeah,
and just to go back a little bit to the detention piece. So when you wrote my bio, you also mentioned I used to work in a detention center. And that was when I was in Illinois. I worked there for a year, and I saw the exact same thing you just described, where so many of the young men had so many, unfortunately, really negative experiences that they had to endure. And for many of them, that was the first time they were even getting mental health treatment. Was when they got into that detention center. So when we talk about kind of the impact of trauma or what not addressing it can look like, it can definitely have a long-term effect. We know that for many people, whatever they're dealing with, if they don't have an opportunity to address it when it comes up, that those issues don't go away, and it can really just sort of tend to eat somebody up inside. And I often say you have to, particularly with trauma, name it to tame it, because unless we acknowledge it, unless we recognize it, unless we talk about it, we can't really get a hold of those feelings and emotions and reactions that are coming up for us. Those, whatever has happened to us, and the way that it's going to come out, whether we want it to or not, right? So it may come out, maybe on a football field, maybe I'm taking out all my aggression, on the football field. Maybe it's going to come out in my relationship with my friends. Maybe I'm always irritable, getting into a lot of arguments, getting into a lot of fights with people. Maybe I'm just going to pour myself into my work and not have a life, right? I'm fine because I'm avoiding thinking about, these things that are coming up all the time. Maybe we're going to have nightmares, we're going to have flashbacks. So trauma, unfortunately, one of the things with trauma is that it lives and stays in our bodies. And so there's really kind of well-known book called The Body Keeps the Score about trauma. And it just talks about how trauma shows up. Trauma, lives inside of our bodies. And so we have to find a way to release it so that we can become healed and become whole. And it doesn't have that continuous hold on us, because it will show up one way or another. It will show up whether we want it to or not. So it'd be better for it to show up in a way where you have some control over it, where you're really working with a trained provider about how to deal with the flashbacks, or those memories come up, or just the overwhelming emotions that you have, as opposed to having an explosion show up when you're not really prepared for, not ready to deal with it.
All right. I want to ask, at what point would a young person, say you have the young person who environment at home is not a comfortable one, in which they can speak to family first in regards to thoughts of things that they're feeling. At what point? Well, let me touch that question first. What is some things you would tell that young person, whether you're working in a school or wherever you come in contact with that young person that don't have that comfort at home? What are some things they can do to seeking help? Because if I go home and I go to mom's and I don't feel comfortable in that area, then that may, take away from the option of going to a doctor, because, I myself don't have, the insurance to go to a doctor for myself. So what are some first steps they can take to seeking help?
Mm-hmm. One of the first places I would say is to maybe start with their school. So a lot of times there are school counselors or school psychologists or other providers in schools that might be able to, or even like sometimes there's some schools have like peer-to-peer support groups and things like that. So that might be a good place to start. There are also some virtual support groups online. So, and they're not, in every jurisdiction, every state, every area is going to be a little bit different, but you can kind of look for different support groups online. I know the Boris Henson Foundation, so that is the one that was founded by Taraji P. Henson. She has really tried to organize a lot of virtual support groups for young people. And there's also some apps that will allow you to like a crisis line almost, that you can kind of text and say, I just need somebody to talk to. And you don't have to give your name. You don't have to, tell them where you live, but it'll just give you an opportunity to talk to someone if you are feeling really overwhelmed.
All right. Well, I thank you for all the information that you've been giving us on this show. I'm definitely getting educated. It's helping me. And I just hope that it will do the same. Like I said, for myself, I know as I talk to other adults, it's definitely a roadblock, because so many people have this negative view of mental health. And I learned that, later in life, even today, I'm 45 years old. I enjoy having those moments of being able to sit down and talk to a therapist. And it's just that so many people don't understand that there could be things from your past, and me being married today, there's the everyday adult things that happen in life, and just having someone, that outlet to speak to and really navigate through those issues. Oh, I just enjoy it. And I wish more people would kind of get over, get past the negative view we have of mental health, and really understand that it is a way to really, like you said, I think the perfect way people put it is no different than taking care of your physical health.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's very important that we address our mental health. We're on our show Out and Up. And so again, we're mainly focusing with our athletes. And so this question I asked for the athlete, and I had one I was talking to in the last week, dealing with stress. Can you talk about dealing with stress when it comes to, I would say from high school to even college or even in middle school, dealing with the stress of just balancing, academics with athletics? Some of them just, sometimes allow those things to overwhelm them. Can you
Yeah.
talk about dealing with that stress?
Yeah, absolutely. I know it is definitely a challenge. I was involved in sports when I was in high school, and then my nephew so was as well, and so saw him kind of balancing. My brother was, so come from a family of people who are kind of involved in sports, love sports, but we also really stress the importance of academics. So keep your grades up and do what you're supposed to do. And that does result oftentimes in a lot of pressure, right? People feel that, that the scholarships are on the line, their, ability to play is on the line if they can't keep their grades up. And what does that mean if they miss the game? And, it is a lot. And so I think to know that you're not alone if that's how you're feeling, because that's very normal and normative. But I think it's important to figure out how you're gonna best manage your time. So I think having effective time management is really key and really important. You can't pour all yourself into your athletics and then leave no time for studies, and vice versa, right? You want to figure out how to really effectively balance the time between all the things that you're really passionate about. And it's also really important to have a good system for stress management. How are you if you notice those feelings of anxiety popping up, what do you do? Is there something that you kind of say to yourself? Is there an action plan you go into? Or you taking some deep breaths to just kind of calm yourself down and remind yourself, you know what, I got this. Is there a support system? Who are your accountability partners? I think that's really important too. You have, we have coaches that are kind of pushing us to, do well at our games and kind of on the field, but do we have that same level of sort of coaching or accountability for academics? So do you have a study partner? Are you maybe getting a tutor for that class that, you're struggling in a little bit? I think trying to balance between academics and athletics definitely requires you to really be able to balance multiple things at the same time. And sometimes you can't do it all alone, right? You have to reach out for help. You have to ask people, hey, or if you see somebody successfully doing it, how are you doing all this stuff? Because I feel like I don't have time to do anything, right? Or asking people who came before you. I think getting that feedback can be really helpful as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I know I do this thing on Monday where I give some quick words of encouragement. And one of my Monday morning thoughts I did last year, it was kind of early in the season. I asked the question, when the sport drops you off, will you land on your feet? So many young people, the sport becomes their identity, and they're so entrenched in it that when an injury comes or they just can't make it to the next level, they're sometimes a wreck and they're lost. Like, can you talk on just kind of managing the emotions? I think a lot of it has to do with really understanding your identity, but dealing with the emotions of an injury, a career-ending injury, or even just getting to that wall that says, hey, this is it, no more, whether it's going on to college or even making it to the pros, sports is done. And you have to find another outlet in life. Can you just speak as we get to the end of the show, speak on dealing with the emotions of recognizing that sport is it, no more.
Yeah, that's a rude awakening for a lot of folks, right? When they hit that wall, that can be a tough realization. And I think one of the things that we have to do is, from the early stages when we get our young people involved in sports, is not let sports, rule their lives, right? We know they're important, but who are they outside of sports? Who are they off the field, off the court? Nurturing other aspects of their identity. So I think having other interests, obviously you may not spend as much time on those other interests, but also, nurturing those other interests is really important. It's important to, if you do end up having an injury, thinking about who, so your sports, your athleticism doesn't define you, right? So how it's a part of you, but it doesn't define you. So what else makes up who you are? What else is really important to you? What else are you really passionate about? I think, recognizing that you have value beyond your athletic contributions. You're more than an athlete, right? As we've heard that phrase repeated many times before. And not to say that, you're not going to be disappointed when you are injured or when you have, kind of realize maybe you're not going to be able to move forward in your athletic career. But so again, if we have good mental health, we're nurturing our mental health all along the way. We will need to build up skills and have skills to deal with disappointments, to deal with the stress, to cope with it, right? You have your support system that is encouraging you and motivating you. You might have some meditation or some music that just kind of calms you down when you start to feel stressed out or feel overwhelmed. I kind of consider coping skills as like, our toolboxes, right? We, depending on what we need at any given time, we need to have our toolbox ready with our tools that we can kind of pull out. And what we use today may not be the same tool that we use tomorrow or next week. It certainly depends on the situation, but it's important as you grow, as you mature, to figure out what goes in your toolbox. How will you sustain your mental health? How will you support yourself during those times of stress and when you feel overwhelmed? What will you do? And to have those tools ready is really important. And I think, that just kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation, is that emotional health is just as important as our physical health. So we have to nurture it just as much, practice, right? Just the same way we practice our skills to shoot our 3-pointer or whatever it is. You have to practice and really get your brain and your mind and your body really attuned so that, during those times of stress or you're feeling overwhelmed, you know what to do, and your body is ready to respond to what you're trying to get it to do.
That's good. That's good. Well, this is a question, and I know it goes slightly away from the mental health subject that we've been able to, I think, engage with. And I think awesome information that I think will be helpful to so many, definitely helpful to me. And I believe so many young people need to hear a message as such, and just the information you've given us on today. But I asked you, because you say you played some sports in high school, you said it was?
Yes, I did. Yes. I was on the track team and I was a cheerleader. Now, some people don't consider cheerleading sport, but I think cheerleading is definitely a sport.
Definitely. And it's definitely an extracurricular activity. I asked this question because you've been through high school. We've all gone through our youth, and I think our kids need to hear it from different aspects. How important is it to have positive people in your circle?
Oh my goodness. That is critical. That is so important. As I mentioned earlier, our peer group is, when we're adolescents, we're in high school, even, early college years, who you are surrounding yourself with is going to dictate so much of how you spend your time. What sort of goals are you setting? What are you thinking about doing beyond high school, right? If we're surrounded by people who, we maybe have different ideas or objectives, when we think about what we're going to do beyond school. So for instance, if I really want to go to college, but my 3 best friends are all saying, yeah, no, I'm just hang around here. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to just, we'll see what happens. Right. I might easily kind of fall into that line of thinking and say, yeah, maybe college really isn't for me after all. I'm going to stay around and hang around with my friends. Right. But if I'm also associated with other people who are like putting in applications and they're going on interviews and, studying for whatever test they need to take, to get into school, then I'm going to be like, oh, what, how do you all do that? What's going on? Right. Similarly, if we're associated with people who are maybe making not so great choices, it's easy to get sucked up into what they're doing and perhaps also make not so great choices. And so, even as adults, you may have heard people say, like, look at the 5 people you spend most of your time with, right? Are you the smartest one in your group? What are other people bringing to the table? Because whoever we surround ourselves with, that's usually, the information we're absorbing, where we even when we think about our values and what's important to us, we want to be with like-minded people. And not to say that, everybody has to do the same thing, because I think it's great to be surrounded by people who have different interests and are doing different things. But you also want to be surrounded by people who are supportive and who are going to push you and encourage you to grow, encourage you to take care of your mental health. Can recognize if something is a little bit off, like, hey, Dana, you haven't really been, hanging out as much with us lately, or you seem like you kind of been keeping to yourself a little bit. Is everything okay? Right? You want to have people who know you well enough to know when you're not being your honest, true, and most authentic self. So that peer group is really, really, really important.
That's good. That's good. In the work that you do in psychology, what is it that makes you passionate about it and drives you when it comes to helping others?
Wow. Well, most of my career has really been working with young people. So I just love to see them grow. I love to, really just to help support them along their life's journey. And sometimes with teenagers and young folks, it's not going to be an instant. You have a session, you have a meeting, and then the next time they got it, everything's fine. But I consider a lot of my work is kind of planting seeds, right? And so if we plant some seeds, nurture some soil, as that young person grows and gets older, eventually I may not see that flower blossom, but I know that I've done a little bit to fertilize that soil to help them grow and really help them get to the next stage of their lives. And, it's awesome. So many times when I was working in the school, I would have people who came back years later, graduated, and oh, Dr. Cunningham just wanted to come and say, thank you so much for talking to me. And I'd be like, oh, this was a person who never wanted to come to session. It was always oh, what's going on, but I think, you're planting seeds of, dealing with stress, talking with people, normalizing, talking about your issues and your problems and concerns. And I just love it. Seeing young people grow and develop gets me excited.
That's good. That's good. As that I am same way. I just love being able to impact the lives of our young people. I think I always have the mindset, very cliche, but they're our future. And I always have the mindset that, even if it's generations behind me, I have young ones. And so these are the pairs of my, the kids that my children and my grandchildren will be around someday. And so I just believe we all have a place, a part to play, and just making sure that we're impacting the lives of our young people for the positive. So those that don't have the positive male or female role models in their life, I believe those that understand that it does truly still take a village.
Absolutely.
And so we'll do our part in impacting the lives of our young people. We could possibly see our world continue to change and prayerfully for the better. And so we're going to close with just this last one. A young person in front of you, Ms. Dr. Cunningham, is there a quick nugget or a little package you can give them to put in their pocket to do a self-check, whether it's weekly, daily, just a self-check to just make sure we're living our best life when it comes to our mental health? Is there some quick words that they can look in the mirror every morning before school and just something they can say or evaluate themselves just to make sure they're continuously making sure their mental health is intact and in play?
Oh, well, let me think. So many things kind of run through my head at the same time. So let me think of one thing. I think it's just, for one person, it could be, what they kind of doing a quick, check mood, check my thoughts, check my behaviors, right? What kind of mood am I in today? Have I done something to nurture my mind today? Have I done something to sort of encourage or support my physical health today? So when we think about that, particularly for our young people, oftentimes when I think about physical health, certainly even with athletes or people who are playing sports, a lot of times they're not really, they're going to practice, they are, doing what they're supposed to do on the field or on the court, but they're not really feeding their physical bodies in the way that is as most beneficial, right? So we're either not sleeping, staying up all night on TikTok or on the phone or texting, and then trying to go to practice, or eating I don't know, a soda and the bag of chips before practice, right? And then expecting to like be awesome. So, you know, kind of doing a check, you know, what have I done to nurture my physical body? What have I done to nurture my mind? So is there something that you have read? Is there, you know, an affirmation? Is there a book? You know, are you studying, right? That's kind of a self-check on you, kind of staying on top of your academics. And what am I doing to nurture my emotional health? So have I done anything for that today? And that could just be a simple, like when you look in that mirror, you're saying, you know what? I am awesomely and wonderfully made. I am amazing, right? You're giving yourself some positive affirmation. You know, or you're practicing a deep breathing skill, or you're listening to, you know, talking to someone about some problem that you had. So, yeah, everybody's a little bit different in terms of what they need. But I think if we kind of you know, I really like that sort of self-reflection, like, you know, how am I feeling today? What am I doing today? Or even doing your like a quick rating on a scale from 1 to 10. Sometimes I encourage young people to do like sort of emotional check-in. So what are the 3 primary emotions I've been feeling today, or I've been feeling in the last week, right? Just to kind of get in touch with your body, in touch with your mind, what's going on with you. So I know that was more than 1, but it was a lot of things going through my head at one time.
That's good. That's good. Dr. Cunningham, we thank you for joining us today. We thank you for the information that you've given us. Thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you. This was great. Yeah. And we also have a lot of information on our blackmentalwellness.com website about a lot of different mental health disorders. So we talked a lot about depression and anxiety and trauma today. There are some fact sheets on our website that are free, easily accessible. We also have a list of a lot of different podcasts and apps and book recommendations for, you know, coping with stress and dealing with stress. So even how to find a therapist if you're looking for that. So definitely check out some of those resources on our website as well.
Well, thanks again. You all know I say it is good to be awesome in that sport that you're playing or involved in, but it's even better to be great in life. And I believe to be great in life and really achieve your very best, you have to address and not run away from taking care of your mental health. So we thank Dr. Cunningham for joining us, and we thank you all for joining us. Now let's go out and up.